thank you again for meeting with me. And I'd love to just hear a little bit about what got you interested in yoga.
Sure. I mean, I've been practicing yoga for about 25 years now, long time. And my involvement has evolved quite a lot during that time. And my initial inquiry into the practice of yoga was just, I was living down in Albuquerque. I was in my, mid 20s. And I took my first class. I think I went with a friend. It was not something that I immediately enjoyed or was drawn to. I began it basically as a means of pain management. I had been dealing with playing related pain in my early 20s. And at the time, I thought that it was, I thought it was over, excuse me, as I choke. I thought it was overuse, because I was practicing so hard. Um, and in reality, I think that it was practicing with way too much tension, and I just had no idea that I was doing it. So I kept injuring myself. Um, I tried everything. I went to see pain specialists, I went to see doctors, and they prescribed anti-inflammatory medication, they prescribed therapeutic stretching. um, I took Feldenkrais awareness classes. I took a year's worth of Alexander technique lessons. I had therapeutic massage. I studied Tai Chi, and I had Rolfing done. Do you know what Rolfing is?
I don't.
Yeah, it's this deep tissue manipulation. It's actually really effective, but pretty painful.
Wow.
um, and they all had some benefits. Like they definitely all had positive effects. But for yoga for me was the one thing that I could control, and it put me in the driver's seat, so to speak. I had to become responsible. It took a lot longer. Like, it's great to go get a therapeutic massage. It's wonderful. But you need a budget to be able to support it as an ongoing means of therapy, and I've never quite been in that position. But I'll still use those other techniques for various things that come up. But yeah, that was really kind of how I got started. And at the time, like a lot of Americans, especially 25 years ago, I thought of yoga primarily as a means of exercise and stretching. And I
Hmm.
really didn't understand at that time that it was this highly advanced form of mental training as well. Um, and in that, it's that mindfulness practice that's really key, that's made it this decades long practice. So yeah, I began to notice through time that, my early on, especially for several years, it was very haphazard. I'd maybe attend a couple of classes, and then I wouldn't, and then maybe I would, and maybe somebody'd talk about it again and I'd try it. And then eventually I started to notice that the more time I was spending on the yoga mat, um, the more my saxophone practicing was also evolving, and it was
Mm.
actually becoming a bit more efficient and a bit more engaged. And that's really when I got super curious about it. And that's when I started to think about doing a yoga teacher training as a way to both deepen my experience and and share the ideas with others,
Hmm.
because I've always believed in this idea that you don't really know something until you can teach it to somebody else. Uh, yeah, right.
Absolutely.
I think that, music is, we've got that in our history, got that in our heritage. It's traditionally passed on non-verbally in many, many cultures. And yeah, so we really know something when we can teach it to somebody else. So that was part of, it was an endeavor myself, but also with this idea that I could share it with others. And really, too, I think I felt like, I did the teacher training when I was, what was I, 37. So I did it in 2007. and no, 2008, excuse me. And I just felt like life was going by so fast. And so there was a little piece of it that was this attempt to not really stop time, because of course you realize right away you can't stop time, but to make sure I wasn't missing my life. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just
Mhm.
so easy to be so anxious and so caught up in all the stuff on the to-do list and all of the, the things that we have to do
Mhm.
in
Yeah.
quotes, to deal with a career in music and this bizarre thing that's really not inherently meant to be as competitive as it is when you take it on as a career. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So anyway, that's really how I got started. And I bet I know what you're going to ask me next, but why don't you go ahead just to make sure I don't go off on a tangent?
Tangents are welcomed.
Okay.
What you were just talking about, this kind of stopping time aspect, is it feeling like you just wanted to be present, like you wanted to just enjoy the moments in the present time without worrying so much about what was coming ahead?
Absolutely, right? I mean, it's so easy to live in the future and live in the past, and that's, we're human beings. That's going to be part of our experience no matter what. But yeah, there's a lot you miss when you're doing that. And my son Noah was 2 at the time, and
Mm,
I just, and then I got very anxious about missing his childhood. So it
yeah.
was, the in Buddhism, they talk a lot about how the experience of pain is human nature. Like, every single human being alive will experience pain, um, but it's the suffering that's a choice. Do you know what I mean? So the worrying about the worrying.
It's so
So
instinctive.
yes, exactly. It's the pain on top of the pain. It's that extra layer that really causes all the suffering. So if we could just deal with the pain and feel the pain without the suffering on top of it, then we'd be much better off, right? So that was part of the endeavor as well.
And I think doing what we do, at least in my experience, it's very easy to tear yourself down even more than necessary. So that suffering
Yeah,
comes
and actually,
easier.
and that is a big, big thing that I think has been a really an important benefit, because I did my yoga teacher training up at Kripalu, that's in Massachusetts, just across the state border, and when we practice yoga, we practice awareness, right? We practice awareness of our breath, our body, and our mind. And when we practice the saxophone, we should be doing those same things, but so often we don't, because we're focused on getting the instrument to work and the technique and blah blah blah, the right notes and the right rhythms and being in tune and whatever. So one thing is that by incorporating yogic elements into our practicing and performing, we can bring that same level of awareness. But the focus of Kripalu Yoga is actually on developing non-judgmental awareness.
Mm,
Um, and they sometimes call it witness consciousness, this sort of voice that watches what happens and makes an observation. And, we're so used to saying when we're practicing, well, that was good, that was bad, rather than simply just making a non judgmental observation. Like, you can say, that was slower than 72. Okay, so
mhm.
then you can do something about it. It doesn't mean you're bad or you did something bad or you did something wrong, right? Um, so yeah, that's what it's really all about, is developing awareness. So awareness, yes. I mean, I know that you're intending to talk about injury prevention, and that's a big part of it as well. But also this, awareness of psychological awareness, mental awareness, spiritual awareness.
Mhm.
So I like to tell my students about this, because everybody thinks yoga is about flexibility. And it is worth noting that the ancient yogis developed yoga specifically to learn how to sit still for long periods of meditation. You know what I mean? So they did want to become more flexible, but it was just because of that.
Mhm.
Um, And so it's really not about your, how you compare in a pose to somebody else. Um, you can't win at yoga. You can't be better than somebody else. You can't, so I always say you can't be first chair yogi. It just doesn't work that way. And you can't get it right and you can't get it wrong. It's really not possible to do a pose wrong or do a breathing technique wrong. You do it with the increased levels of awareness, um, and through time, that evolution of awareness, we're coming back to increasingly subtle phenomenon and levels of detail over the years, and that's where your awareness becomes really heightened. I mean, it's very much like your relationship with an instrument.
Yeah, I love the way that you're describing it. It sounds so particular to the person. It's their journey. It's not in competition with somebody else. It's not in comparison with anybody else. And there's no right or wrong way to do it. Is kind of what you're saying, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me see. I dug out my old yoga teacher manual because I just thought this was pretty interesting. So if allow me just to read a very short paragraph,
Hmm.
because it specifically talks about Kripalu Yoga, which is a mix of lots of different types of yoga. So really, it's a mix of Hatha Yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jhana Yoga, and it puts all those together to make Kripalu Yoga, which they call the yoga of life, right? But this is what it says. The focus of Kripalu Yoga is on developing non judgmental awareness or witness consciousness. This allows for inner stillness in yoga practice, meditation, daily life, and amidst adverse life circumstances. As witness consciousness develops, so does your ability to consciously choose how to act on thoughts, feelings, and emotions.
Hmm.
The practice of yoga can be used to reveal our true nature. When you deliberately put your body in a yoga posture, control your breath, and direct your attention, you master the will and are able to access deep states of surrender. And this is Kripalu Yoga. So I thought it was a pretty good little summary to kind of bring this together as we talk about what it has to do with music and saxophone. So
Absolutely. Oh gosh, I love that. It's like creating, and what you talked about before. It's like there's something about creating this awareness, but then this non-judgmental awareness is it actually takes practice, I feel like, in my
oh yeah, I mean, definitely, and practice for life. Do you know what I mean? Like
yeah.
it's just sometimes undergraduates come to college and they've, I think we all did this. It's not just
Hmm.
probably sometimes like we go there and we think we're going to learn how to play the saxophone and then graduate. And then, you know what I mean? So it's one of the first early lessons that every single day that we decide to interact with the instrument and with music, we are practicing. So, yeah, I think that's actually super important. Just like we practice physical health through exercise, we practice mental health on a daily basis. You know what I mean? So, all of our wonderful tools, um, it's a daily practice, just nutrition, trying to eat good food.
Sure.
Um, so it's all a daily practice that we don't really ever get to stop. You never
Mm.
get there. It's
It reminds me a
um,
little bit about my I've been taking Alexander technique lessons, and it reminds me of my
yes.
lesson last week. And the teacher was talking about that we want immediacy, we want things right away. There's an outcome that we just want to happen, but the fact of it is that it's a process, and we need to savor in that process. And there's really no attainable outcome. It's just a constant learning.
That's exactly right. We have moments of them, right?
Mm,
Like
sure.
a concert's a very good example,
Hmm.
or a celebration. But I think a lot of times people tend to live their lives from event to event rather than the time in between events. You know,
Mm, for sure.
and my favorite month of the year is November And it's because it's the time in between the events. You know, fall goes by and you have Halloween and then, well, I guess Thanksgiving's in November, so that doesn't quite work. But you know what I mean? The time in
Kind of.
between, you gotta really
Yep.
embrace the time in between. So, you know, the practice room, I mean, sure, concerts can be great, but if that's all you do, you're going to be pretty unhappy, I think, you know, because you're missing everything that's in between.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, but I think Kripalu Yoga in particular is pretty interesting in terms of how it relates to musicians, because there's a senior yoga teacher up at Kripalu named Stephen Cope. And he's a published author. He's written some wonderful things. So if anyone wants to learn more, I definitely go check out the books by Stephen Cope. But he is the one who first created this research. He's a pianist, and Kripalu is right across the street from Tanglewood, the summer home of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, where there's a big world-renowned, enormous music festival. And so Stephen Cope was going across the street to Tanglewood, watching the world's greatest artists perform and noticing, those musicians look a whole lot like yogis when they're on their mats in these states of heightened concentration and heightened focus. So he thought that was pretty interesting. So he created a study and an institute. And the institute is called the Institute for Extraordinary Living. So he basically wanted to study scientifically what it means to live a fulfilled life. And you know, it's a pretty great question. What does it mean to live a fulfilled life? So I knew I was in the right place when I was finding this out, because, yeah, who doesn't want to know that, right?
For sure.
So he got Harvard Medical School involved. Harvard Medical School studied the results of Tanglewood musicians, the Tanglewood Fellows, studying yoga with Kripalu teachers. And it's worth saying that Stephen Cope also studied all kinds of populations. He studied Vietnam veterans, he studied athletes, but that first group of people that he chose to study were these Tanglewood musicians. And he did it for 2 summers, and this is what he found. He said, where'd it go? Quote, "The changes in the musicians who did yoga were quite dramatic. The first year's group had significantly less performance anxiety than the control group. The second year's larger study confirmed that finding and also uncovered improvements in the yoga group's capacity to enter into flow states." So that was really interesting. There was a definite reduction in musculoskeletal disorders. You know, like I was saying, that was my foray into yoga. It was like, I want to be in less pain. It was basically that. So that did correlate, but that wasn't the main thing. The 2 main things were less performance anxiety, significant reduction in performance anxiety, and the primary thing was this enhanced capacity to enter into flow states, or what's termed a flow state.
The psychological effects rather than physical.
Yes, I mean both, right?
Well,
So, you know, the word yoga itself means to yoke. So, yoga itself is about the integration of mind, body, and spirit. Um, every single yoga pose, a lot of people that practice yoga don't realize this, is physically embodying opposites. So it's taking dualities and unifying them into one. So I know this isn't a practice, but like, for example, if I'm even if I can't do it on the camera the way we've got it set up, but if I'm taking my feet and sinking into the ground and taking the crown of my head and lifting it toward the ceiling, I've got opposing motions happening within one physical body. And so, but if you think about it, any single pose, whatever it is, whether it's warrior, whether it's taking your arms and reaching toward the side walls, but drawing the upper arm back into the shoulder socket, it was designed to be this physical embodiment of dualities. So anyway, yeah, this flow state was coined first by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, University of Chicago researcher. Do you know that book called Flow?
mm-hmm, I do.
Good. Yes, it's fantastic. I don't remember the year of publication, but Um, and he described it. It's a psychological state in which a person is really fully engaged or immersed in what they're doing. Improvising musicians sometimes call that being in the groove. Athletes sometimes call it being in the zone. And it's part of this. This first of all experience of extreme well-being where the challenge level and the skill level are just perfect, and it's the more often performers have that experience of being in a flow state, the more motivated we become to push those boundaries of our mastery. So that's really pretty interesting. And the author of Flow, he says, I pulled this out because I just thought it was so interesting. He says, one of the most important active ingredients here is the refinement of attention. Training attention to come back over and over again to a complex task allows awareness to become increasingly absorbed in the task at hand. And so, what I was talking about before about this practice of yoga and saxophone as being this process of coming back with increasingly more attuned levels of detail, both physically, emotionally, psychologically, it all comes together. So then your awareness becomes regularly absorbed, and then we're regularly achieving these flow states of what can be profound absorption and concentration. So yeah, and then one tricky thing though, your attention has to be trained in a relaxed fashion. And that
Great.
is key because a lot of musicians concentrate really well. I know you can go practice for 6 hours and concentrate the whole time, right? But is it a relaxed concentration?
Mm.
So, and that's actually a really important yogic concept called Uparigraha, and it means non-grasping, because as soon as you start grasping to or trying to cling to the outcome, most of us find out that it's in other words, the more we grasp for perfection, the less likely it is to happen.
Mm.
Right? Have you ever noticed that? And an example I like to use with my students is you're playing along, you miss a note. Your brain says, crap, I missed a note. And then you miss more notes because you were thinking about missing the note. And then you think, oh my gosh, I really have to focus because I'm missing all these notes. And then, then it's a spiral down. Whereas if you just wrong note, move on.
That reminds me, and one of our, I don't know if you remember, but that's something you said in our ASA lesson years ago, was that like we'll have a performance and something will happen, and instead of I guess intensifying that, you can just tell yourself, let it go, it's done, now you can just play. Now you can just be.
The worst thing that happened, right? Make the music.
Yeah.
And you know, uh, I don't know if anyone remembers this. I think it's okay to say this. I don't know who's going to eventually listen to it, but I'm saying this as an example of a really beautiful thing. One of the most yogic moments I've ever seen on the stage was actually Claude DeLong at the conference at the University of Georgia, because he was playing the Day
Mm.
Crick Sonata, and he went to play. Were you there?
I wasn't there, no.
He went to play, and the first note didn't come out. And of course, it's Claude DeLong, so we're thinking, oh my goodness. And he has to, he took the time, he had to stop and mess with his reed and readjust it and restart. And we're kind of going, oh my gosh, he's like a human being, first of all, so how cool is that? And second of all, he went on to play the most beautiful rendition, because he just left it, you know he just left it.
Mm.
It didn't matter. It was something that happened in the moment, and it was incredible. So I was really inspired. That's kind of the first time I made that connection and went, oh, now I get it. Doesn't mean I
And
can always do it, but I get it.
and you feel that as an audience member too, just when that moment happens, like how are they fussing with the read? How are things happening? Is it in a really like frantic kind of way? Or is it just
Right.
like that person recognizes, all right,
I
I'll
got a
take it.
problem this exactly, exactly. And Kenny Werner, do you know jazz pianist Kenny Werner? He wrote
Yeah,
the book
I
Effortless
read,
Artistry.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So he talks about that in his book, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of blew me away when I first read it because he talks about the fact that his best performances happen when he doesn't care about the outcome of the performance. And I had to read that part, like 5 times before I understood what he
Mm-hmm.
was talking about. Because I was like, how can you not care? How can you not care? We care so much, right? And that wasn't what he meant at all. He meant that he was so focused on making the music that he didn't have time to worry about what such and such in the audience was thinking, or how they were, oh my gosh, how am I doing? Am I going to win the competition? Am I going to get the job? It didn't matter because he was making the music. So he didn't
Yeah.
care about the outcome. And that's when he played his best.
I remember reading that and then trying to have that mindset um, during concerts and performances. And I realized that the more that I became attuned to what I was doing in the practice room, when I would go and perform a concert, it had to do more with just trusting yourself rather than not caring. So it has a similar effect, but it's like you know that you're able to execute what you want. So just go for it and enjoy, kind of thing.
And yes, absolutely. I like the way you put that. And you can make that choice at any point. Do you know what I mean? So you can be mid performance and whatever, something ghastly could happen. But as long as you step back, choose your reaction, then at least we have a better chance of not destroying the experience. And for me too, it's there's a large aspect of actually enjoying making music that can be really destroyed by that process. So that's why I thought Stephen Cope's research was super poignant. I mean, we know that performance anxiety can destroy our performance, both physically, cognitively, mentally, but it also becomes just everything we love about music isn't there. It's not fun. It's this horrible experience. So that's a real thing.
And now, at what point did you say, I want to show this to other people? I want to show this to students at Hartt. I want to teach this.
Um, well, pretty much right away because of what I was saying earlier. I mean, like my initial ideas were, um, if I really want to understand this, part of this process is going to be teaching it to somebody else.
Hmm.
But then pretty quickly, when you start to see the results in other people, it's like any kind of teaching, there's great reward and joy in at least trying to offer the experience. One of my music education teachers at the University of Michigan used to say that, there's some things you can teach, and there's some things that can't be taught. They can only be learned. And in those cases, it's up to the teacher to create the environment in which it's possible to learn it. And I thought that was a really beautiful way to put it. So yeah, and I think that this course, I mean, there's definitely some things. There's lots of things I can teach. I can teach lots of techniques. I can um, deal with meditative aspects. I can deal with the process. I can teach different breathing techniques, certainly poses. Um, but there's a certain amount of that experience that I'm setting up the environment for that allows then the participant to be able to take it in. Not
Hmm.
unlike music, right? I mean, it's when we have those, Don Cinta would call them goosebump moments. And so I've made my life quest to try to figure out what causes those goosebump moments. And when you get them, then go to that performer and try to figure out what it is that they did that made me feel that way.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? And then so there's some of it that's it's not like it's a direct line from A to B, even with all the steps, the technical steps in the right direction. There's still amount of space you have to create to allow for the opportunity to learn in addition
Hmm.
to all of the teaching. That makes sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's
But I
so
will
many. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Kripalu, because they had to shut down, they did start a whole online series. So if anybody ends up listening to this and is interested, Kripalu should have a really nice online series. So that's a place you can go directly if you decide you want to practice. So,
Fantastic. Yep,
yeah.
that was actually the question I was going to ask, if Kripalu Yoga has any online resources.
Yeah, yeah. I think they, I mean, there's some of their senior teachers have put out DVDs in the past, but I think like so many of us, it's been COVID that's made them go, oh, let's make this a really regular thing that people can access regardless.
Mhm.
So, yeah. I do feel like if it's okay, there's another aspect that's really a great tie-in to playing the saxophone, because Kripalu yoga,
Absolutely.
I mean, there's actually 8 different limbs to classical yoga practice. In my class, I tend to deal with 3, which are the 3 that the study involved with Tanglewood, and that's meditation, breathing, which is the Sanskrit word is pranayam, and poses or movement, right? So, but the breathing exercises are unbelievably helpful to saxophone players, right? And
Mhm.
so in my weekly technique class that I have with all my students, we start with, I will call them yoga influenced movement and stretches that are all breath based. And if anyone out there is looking for, your own classes, for one thing for me that's very helpful is if you can stay focused on your breath for the entire class or the better part of a class, or keep getting brought back to the breath, that is a sign in my book of a really effective class. If
Mhm.
you aren't focusing on that breath in conjunction, because it's the breath that really gives you awareness to the movement or to that embodiment of dualities. So it's so important. And for us, of course, the technique of inhalation and exhalation to play is pretty direct. So it's very cool. Um, but I think the ancient yogis described the energy body as having thousands of invisible channels, and they called them nadis, NADI. And modern science just calls that our nervous system. So we know we can affect our psychological and mental states by the way we breathe. Like we get upset and somebody says, take a deep breath, slow down your breathing. We know that works because it's actually increasing the alpha waves in the brain. Whereas if we're hyperventilating or we're nervous, we're panting, that's creating more beta waves in the brain. And those are the ones that are creating more anxiety. So
Mhm.
sometimes if you want to, the equivalent of a caffeine boost, then you will use those specific breathing techniques. So we can invigorate our bodies and minds, we can relax our bodies and minds, all through the practice of breathing. So, yeah, it's very cool.
That's fantastic, and something I think a lot of us woodwind players just need to know.
For sure, right? Wooden players in general. So, anyway, yeah, I did a actual practice for Nate Nabb's online class, or series of master classes
Yeah.
when we went into quarantine. So I think he archived it. So if anyone wants to actually have an introductory class, you can check it out there. But I am hoping to formalize that at some point so that it's more readily available. So feel free to get in touch with me and see if it's posted on my website yet, or someplace that we'd all go to.
And is that the primary way people get in touch with you, is through your website?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm pretty easy to find. Just go through my name. My website will come up. The universities will come up. So it's, yes, absolutely. Or they can ask
Fantastic.
you, and you know where to find me.
Yes. Um, Thank you so much. Thank you all for checking out this podcast slash video series. If you have any questions or topics that you might want to be discussed, you can contact me on social media or thomaskirksmusic@gmail.com. Have a great day.